some of this light here. So we're going to talk about other things that affect us as owner operators, where time is money. Um, this video we'll talk about bottlenecks in truck parking. You know, the DOT, OOIDA, and ATA, American Truck Association, they all know where the bottlenecks are in the country, and they can actually calculate and assign a dollar value associated with that bottleneck. You know, they understand that time is money. You know, so when freight is slowed down or restricted, you know, because of these bottlenecks, that costs the country money, lost productivity. It affects the GDP. I'll give you an example. If you take that US 69 Oklahoma, big cabin, you take that from I-44, and you take that south to Dallas, into 75, US 75 in Dallas, you go through a lot of small towns and a lot of red lights. You know, that's not an interstate. There's parts where you can get up to 65 or 70, but then you got to slow down to 35. Then you got to go through these towns, and there's like 5 traffic lights, and of course you're going to hit every single traffic light. And there's a local city kitty or county mountie right there watching you the whole time. You know, because they watch that road very closely for speeders. It's a bottleneck. They've talked about creating new interstate to bypass all those small towns. I don't know if they ever will, but there is a cost associated with those bottlenecks. And you think about your time, you know, the value of the owner operator's time, the earnings, you know, that you make, and what these bottlenecks represent. You know, I see more often that 2-lane highways are becoming 3-lane highways because the U.S. population is growing, not only because of illegal immigration, but just naturally over time, population grows. You know, when they put in the highway system in the 1950s, you know, the population was much less than it is, you know, 75 years later. And the highways need to be updated. You know, another one is I-40 from Memphis to Little Rock, or even from Little Rock into Texas, that I-30. You know, those should all be 3-lane highways. The volume of traffic they have, that would cut down on a lot of accidents, and it would help remove some of these bottlenecks. So, you know, bottlenecks is a big deal. And when you look at the highway bill and construction projects that are approved, they're generally, you know, there to eliminate some of these bottlenecks. And I think there's like 100 of them in the country. The OOIDA has identified like 100 different bottlenecks. So time is money. Money is time. This is a common theme for owner operators. You know, we talked about the value of the owner operator's time. We talked about the value of the mechanic's time. You know, then there's, you know, the highway systems itself is costing you time and money because of the bottlenecks. And in a similar way, truck parking, or the lack of truck parking, is also costing you money. I've seen where some studies suggest it costs the average truck driver $5,000 or $6,000 a year in lost income because there's no truck parking. You know, when you think about, you got electronic logs and you're trying to find a place to park, and you know, you may have an hour remaining on your logs that you could drive, but you're going to stop because, you know, you got to look for truck parking. You know, they say a typical truck driver spends up to an hour every single day looking for a place to park the truck. Well, there's a cost associated with that, you know, because time is money, money is time. You know, that time you spend looking for truck parking is not necessarily productive time that you're going to be earning income. You know, it's kind of like wasted time. You know, so it's costing the average truck driver $5,000 or $6,000 a year to look for truck parking. So, we see that there are problems within the highway system and the lack of truck parking that creates inefficiencies and costs the drivers time and subsequently costs the driver money. So when you think about some of these parking clubs, like there's a relatively new one called truck parking. It's becoming more and more popular. And the idea is that yeah, you're paying for parking, but you're not wasting time looking for parking. So they try to do a cost benefit analysis there that shows you what the benefits are joining their club. But we're seeing more and more. Congress is passing budgets that include expanded truck parking, public parking, and as these truck stops are becoming more paid parking. They want $10 or more for overnight parking because drivers are trying to be thrifty. They don't go into the store like they used to. They don't need to. They got the refrigerators and the microwaves in the truck. They do their cooking in the truck. They don't need to go into the stores and the restaurants to spend their money. But yet they'll park at these locations. Well, these small businesses that these truck stops are, the independent truck stops, can't afford to have you not go in their store and offer free parking. So a lot of times they'll charge you $10 for parking. I think public parking, more rest area parking, is the right answer because you know there's a shift in the drivers. The drivers aren't going into the convenience stores. That's very expensive. If you're spending 20, $30 a day on fast food and items from the convenience store, the travel store, that adds up on a daily basis. And per diem, that's not necessarily going to cover everything. And even if it did, it still represents a cost savings for the driver if he doesn't go into that store. So there's a squeeze on truck parking. They say there's 3 million truck drivers, but only 300,000 public truck parking spots. So for every parking spot, there's one parking spot for every 11 trucks. And this is why you find it so hard to find a place to park. And this is going to cost you time. It's going to cost you money. The DOT is well aware of this, just like they're well aware of the bottlenecks. They can assign a dollar value to it. So, as a small business owner, as an owner operator, what you need to realize is that your time has a dollar amount assigned to it, and everybody's trying to take your time, right? Nobody cares about your time. The shippers and receivers are getting really bad. I went to one last night delivering a load. Now they got a barcode or a QR code at the gate. They don't even want to talk to you. Okay. So, but you're expected to use your cell phone that you pay for to make their system work. You're not being compensated for that. It's not like Crete is paying you to have a cell phone, but you're expected to have a QR code, scan it, and you do all the data entry. The bill of lading, the delivery number, the pickup number, your truck number, your trailer number, your license number, your phone number. I don't give them my email. That's going too far, but they sometimes ask for that too. They'll take your picture and everything, and then they put all the work on the truck driver for free. You're not being paid, and then you do the QR code to get in, and you do the QR code to get out. So they shifted all the work from shipping and receiving and from security to the truck driver, where the truck driver is not getting paid. So they're making money by taking your time. A lot of companies rip off people, and people don't even realize they're being ripped off because they're taking your time. Time is money. The time you're filling out all their requirements to pick up and deliver a load, you're doing it for free. You're basically giving them your time, which means you're giving them your money. They're not paying a security guard. They're not paying a shipping and receiving clerk. They're making the driver do all the work. So, obviously, the owner operator, the driver, this time is valuable. And everybody wants to take your time. Everyone wants you to do stuff for free. And they don't want to pay for anything. If they can shift the work to the driver, they will do it. So you gotta, kind of be on guard. Kind of realize what the situation is. And recognize, many things on a day-to-day basis steals your time. It's like you wonder why you can't make more earnings. Well, a lot of that is because you're giving your time away, and you don't even realize it, and you're like, well, that's no big deal. Okay, well, because the company doesn't pay their own security guard or their shipping receiving clerk, they make more profit. You spend more time, so you have less time behind the wheel and you're making less profit. This is a zero-sum game. Your loss is their gain. So nobody wants the driver to gain. They want the driver to lose. So this is how the game is played. And bottlenecks is kind of like the same thing. If there's a bottleneck, major cities and highways, it's costing you time. It's costing you a lot of time. And lack of truck parking, again, costing you time. A lot of times trucking companies or businesses and the government doesn't care whether you have to waste time looking for a truck parking. Now, I think that's starting to change. I think OOIDA has done a good job of pushing that agenda and making it a priority. But in years past, they didn't care. There's like, they don't care about truck drivers. They don't care if you don't have the hours. They don't care if you're wasting your time, as long as you're not wasting their time. This is kind of one-sided, right? You go to a shipper and receiver, and they take hours to load you or unload you, and you run out of hours, and guess what? They tell you to get the hell off their property. They don't care if you're out of hours, and many times you're not getting paid. Even at Crete, you got to wait 2 hours before you start getting paid detention. I think you should get pay immediately. I think, personally, I think you should be paid from the time you start your clock to the time you end your clock. And including the time you're being pre-trips, the time you're fueling, the time you're doing post-trips, all that time you spend at detention. If you're stuck in traffic, you should be paid for that. So every minute you're on duty or driving, you should be paid. But we're not. So there's many instances where the industry or companies are stealing your time, and your challenge as the owner operator is keep it to a minimum. The more you can keep that lost time to a minimum, the more profitable you're going to become. So recognize the game for what it is. This is a zero-sum game. You got bottlenecks. Maybe that'll affect your decision whether or not you take out load, because there's a bottleneck. Or a lot of times I won't take loads into the Northeast or even the Eastern Seaboard because there's a lack of truck parking. It's like, I'm not taking that load to Baltimore. There's nowhere to park. Or New Jersey or Eastern Pennsylvania. There's nowhere to park. You got to find a parking spot by noon, or you don't have a place to park. Like, screw it, I'll haul a load to Kansas, or Texas. I'll find a place to park out there. But it affects my decision. Like, okay, if I take that load and I know there's a bottleneck on that route, that's going to affect my profit. If I take that load, I know there's a lack of truck parking, or I have to pay for parking, that's going to affect my profit. If I take that load and the shipper and receiver makes me do all the work once I get there, that's going to affect my profit. If I'm got to wait hours and hours and not get paid for detention, that's going to affect my profit. So you look out for these things. You got to think as an owner operator. You got to know the game. You got to know who the players are. You got to know when you're being taken advantage of, and you got to remember those shippers and receivers, like the one I delivered last night. I'll think twice before hauling their load again. Because they're wasting a lot of my time because they don't want to pay someone to check the driver in. They want to put the work on the driver. So this is costing you money. And it's unfortunate, but until Congress changes the way drivers are compensated, I don't see it. I don't see the industry changing. The Congress needs to make it a rule that if the driver's performing work, that's whether it's driving or not driving, it's still work. They should be compensated. If your company requires you to wash the truck, take it to a car wash, you know, this is not a charitable organization. This is a for-profit organization. They should pay you. You're spending your time out of your day to go get the truck washed. You should be paid. If you're spending time to fuel the truck, you should be paid. If you're spending time for truck repairs, you should be paid. But you're not paid. This is lost time. Time is money. And I think if drivers were paid for all their time, then they could reach financial success easier, quicker, and perhaps improve their lifestyle and live longer. They wouldn't have to work so hard for so little. But until Congress changes that, I don't see anything changing, and they probably won't change it. Automated trucks, we're gonna have to start competing with that. And there'll be no incentive for Congress to change the ways drivers are being compensated when automation could drastically affect the industry. All right, guys, that's all I got for you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the internet.